Hello, everyone, and welcome to this Team Intelligence special webinar series that we like to call the Talent Conversations Over Coffee webinar series. So maybe you still have coffee, or maybe you've moved to lunch, I don't know, but thank you for joining us today, and certainly happy Friday. Today we're discussing what development individual contributors really need, and I'm particularly excited about this one because this vital doing level and group in the organization is oftentimes the forgotten leaders who don't always have a clear path to learn and grow. And so this is a really important topic. My name is Lisa Marie Hanson, and I'm the Chief Learning and Marketing Officer here at Team Intelligent. And I've been inside organizations in HRD and in OD and OE roles, and I've spent over a decade in large-scale consulting. And I'm what I like to call a practitioner's practitioner. So when I say that, the idea of keeping tools that are science-based in our hands is definitely my mission. And I'm very pleased to welcome the gentleman pictured on the right here, co-founder and thought leader Roger Pearman, to today's discussion from a subject matter expertise and an IP expertise standpoint. When you think of Roger, you think Wake Forest University as an academician, for his far-reaching online certifications, for his books, Hardwired Leadership, and my favorite, which is the U book, and that was co-authored with giants Lombardo and Eichinger, and it is Roger's current partner in crime, our other co-founder, Bob Eichinger, that has created this wonderful entity called Team Intelligence. So welcome, Roger. Thank you for making the time today. You out there? Let's check your mic.
Well, I'm delighted to be with the folks who are with us today, and certainly look forward to getting observations and feedback as we move through this presentation, but also as folks begin to use the material. So it'll be a great discussion today. And one of those topics that I felt very strongly about for some time with paying attention to individual contributors. So good that we're doing it.
Thank you. So our purpose today is to discuss individual contributors and their development, and our roadmap for our time today is to position it within the Team Intelligent approach, to talk about why this is a pressing issue or a burning platform, to give you an example to work through that shows the differentiation, and to discuss the specifics around the tools from an application standpoint. And you know, if with time allowing, we will leave time for a Q&A, and especially with a thought leader like Roger, it is certainly an opportunity to bend his ear, and I would suggest you do so. So logistically, I'm hoping our lines are muted, and if yours isn't, feel free to make that happen for us. And we are recording, as Roger mentioned, and if you haven't yet, go ahead and open your chat panel. We will be using the chat panel and collecting questions throughout, as well as working them into the conversation. So go ahead and talk to us via the chat panel, and we will try to, in real time, incorporate those things and then check it and revisit it for our Q&A time. So in terms of the context, our approach at Team Intelligent is to help practitioners have a science-based versatile tool that they can trust. And those names right there on the logo are certainly thought leaders whose names have been out in the market for decades. So I'm going to invite Roger Pearman to weigh in about the Team Intelligent approach and talk about how it fits in the talent landscape.
Thank you, LM. One of the things that Bob and I began to discuss several years ago, after we had created several iPad applications which were intended to provide what I would call consulting support at the touch of the screen, we had created 3 applications: Teamosity, which is all about helping teams be successful, and one entitled Career Fitosity, which is to aid folks at whatever level in their career process to think about what's good for their career choices, and then Relate, which is intended for more academic settings on how students could be more effective in their academic pursuits. And during that conversation, Bob and I began to discuss the need for a fresh approach to talent management and tried to take a look at the whole of the question. If we will get our screen back there, LM, the slide disappeared.
You want this one?
That one, good.
That one, cool.
The whole of the question of, well, if we are going to approach talent management from a fresh new perspective, what are the things that we've learned over the last 20 years, especially? What does the research tell us? And how might we leverage those insights and those science-based pieces to help us make a contribution for the next generation? And one of the abundantly clear pieces that both experientially and data-driven insights was the nature of what I refer to as the worlds of individual contributors, managers, and executives, meaning they all may be in the same enterprise, but the psychological dynamics that are at play for them in order to be successful has a lot of different looks. So we categorized what are the key roles that are essential, regardless of the enterprise, for-profit, not-for-profit, whatever the entity is. If you're at the top, you have certain roles you must fulfill. If you are in the middle zone, there are roles you absolutely must fulfill. And of course, to be successful as an individual contributor coming into an organization, there are things you must fulfill and do. And you can't talk about the whole of an enterprise without also talking about teams and high potentials. So as we had this conversation and began to settle on an architecture, we wanted to make sure in each and every circle that you saw in the PowerPoint, each and every circle is a need in the talent management system. So we wanted to make sure as we were developing products that the products would help meet the needs of the talent managers, no matter where they were and no matter what the nature of the enterprise is. And so when you see the theme, which in our next slide, we try to make very clear, we've taken a look at what are the knowledge, skills, and attributes that are absolutely critical for you to be successful wherever you are in an enterprise. One of the experiences certainly I had years ago when I was the chief talent management and HR executive for a financial services company was to begin to institute an overall look at talent management and talent development from the ground up. And when I think of the ground up, it begins with how do we nurture the individual contributor? Because if we do our job right there in nurturing the individual contributor, you get to see a compounding of that nurturance over time as they grow and expand their skills and knowledge and as their leadership capabilities begin to emerge. So we have done everything we know to do to extract from all of the available research what is it that makes for being a successful individual contributor, as well as what are the experiences that both Bob and I have had since we've both been in executive roles responsible for the talent management function. What are the things we know are vital for individual contributors to be successful? So one of the things that is different about all of our approach is what we refer to as our performance libraries. And so our performance libraries are organized all the same, meaning the architecture has a set of roles that people need to fulfill within the particular context that we're looking at, if it's leaders, managers, or individual contributors. There are particular practices that people need to engage in, and the practices will vary depending on both the enterprise culture as well as the goals and objectives of the enterprise. And of course, at the end of the day, it's about behavior. I've always felt that if you really want people to develop, you need to help them understand what the particular behaviors are that they need to move toward, and which could be some behaviors they need to move away from. So, as an everyday example, if you are an individual who, with all your enthusiasm and excitement coming into an organization, you really want to show everybody your expertise, and you do so with abundance and with enthusiasm such that you are interrupting people a lot, you may not know that that's getting you in trouble, especially when you're an individual contributor. So helping them understand, see that behavior is a challenge, how to moderate that behavior, and how to work collaboratively with those around you becomes an important developmental task. So what we'll do in most of our time together is we'll take a look at our individual contributors' performance library. We want to take a good look at what are some of those key roles that I mentioned and some of the practices that make absolutely the biggest difference. Each of the libraries have a different number of roles. For example, Kasai, the leaders library, has 9 roles. Kasam, the manager library, has 11 roles. Kasai has 10 roles. And as we get into taking a look at that, we want to be mindful that the roles are, you can't ignore any of them. They must be a part of your awareness in order to be able to perform and move further in the entity. When we get to the practices, we've organized the practices into various domains. And I think of the domains as a heuristic, meaning it really gives us a chance to understand that, for example, one of the domains is managing self. Well, that makes perfect sense, that there are certain practices around managing yourself which are vital. The very first practice that we talk about in the library is cultivating an effective self. And we provide tips on what that really means, and observables on what that really looks like. We have a domain on doing the work. Of course, it makes perfect sense that an individual contributor would need to understand how it is that having a clarity around the goals and tasks and the resources available and what they need to do to use those to be successful is vital. We have a domain relating to others. I think we've interviewed hundreds of execs and managers, and one of the things that they keep saying about their newest individual contributors is they often seem to think relating to others means how fast you can text or send an email, as opposed to what a real collaboration means.
Yeah.
And so helping individual contributors, the newer ones, obviously they're individual contributors who come in later in their career as well as in different places in the organization, but in general, the newer ones who are showing up to take on new individual contributor roles need some additional assistance with understanding what relating to others is all about. And then, of course, building your career. Our last domain in the individual contributor library is about, here are the kinds of things you as an individual contributor need to put on your radar to build your career for the future. So you see listed on the screen the 10 roles. And as I said, we've threaded the various practices across these roles. So we have IP, where when you learn this library, you see the coding between the practices and the roles and can coach people accordingly, depending on what their needs may be. But as you look at the roles, and hopefully if we've achieved our goal of a common everyday sort of language around these concepts, it seems fairly transparent that this role, these sets of roles would be highly critical to being a successful individual contributor. Speaking of the language, one of the things that we did in creating the libraries, sending the material to multiple panels of people to say, here's the idea. Let help us make sure we're framing this in a language that people can immediately grasp and understand its importance. And so, as you look at the list, who could doubt that an individual contributor has a role and a responsibility for making sure that certain things are completed and done, or that working with others in a smooth and collaborative fashion is somehow anything other than mission critical in the role that you're doing. Helping individual contributors understand what adding value means sometimes is like lighting a fire. When individual contributors begin to understand that they have a responsibility to offer a value-added input, it's pretty fabulous to watch the notion that they're now more intentional about what it is we're hoping that they will do. And of course, showing and encouraging an interest in growth and making sure that they understand their role as a citizen of an enterprise.
That last one.
We find consistently a critical conversation. What is going to be required of you to be successful here as a member, as a citizen of this community, are certain kinds of things. And I'm going to take a quick little parallel to the Google Aristotle project, which, while that's about teams, there was an insight that the manager found that we find to be true at all levels, but especially at the individual contributor level. And that is, if I know the rules of engagement, if I understand what my responsibilities are within the context that I'm in, I have the greatest opportunity to bring my talent, knowledge, expertise to bear to help us achieve what we want to achieve. And building and showing organizational citizenship behavior is about that very thing.
Yeah.
Now, LM mentioned earlier on that there's a burning platform. It's a way of saying, okay, what are some of the key drivers? Why should we care about individual contributors? And there are a couple of reasons. I made the statement earlier, compounding. I think we've all learned on this webinar, all of us who are here, know the power of compounding interest. And it's that process of making sure you've gathered an asset, you put it in the right place, you put it in the right environment, and it continues to grow day after day after day. And if we think about our individual contributors that way, that we've expended a great deal of money, really built a lot of mechanisms to bring individual contributors into the enterprise, we're making that investment. They're showing up, we're onboarding them, we're continuing to invest. And unfortunately, a large number of organizations sort of leave that along and say, well, go have some experiences, and when you get to be a manager, we have a development plan for you. Our attitude is, no, we need to start that intentional, mindful development from the start. We want the individual contributor to begin to find his or her way as they move forward. Are they the kind of individual who ultimately really wants to be, throughout their life and in their career, the arc of their career, they want to be the best accountant that's ever walked the earth, or they want to be the absolute most talented marketing analyst that one could ever want to have around you. And those are worthy and important roles that we want to encourage. And there are those in the individual contributor crowd who have a knack for learning a variety of things, who can take on managerial and supervisory roles. And then if we're especially lucky And we've done a really good job recording. We have managed to grab a couple of individual contributors who are high potentials, individuals who have the capability to learn massively, if you will, a whole variety of things, to take on a whole variety of increasingly complex roles so that they wind up in the C chair 20, 30 years down the road. And of course, our approach and our effort to be very mindful and intentional about the whole system is to give an organization the opportunity to do just that, to take a look at and nurture all of their individual contributors on the range of the roles that they might want to have over the arc of their career, as well as how do we make sure we've tapped into that energy of those who can be talented managers and leaders, and those who are exceptional, who can become the next CEO or the next CFO of the enterprise. So when I think of the importance of paying attention to individual contributors, I've in talking to talent managers around the country, they often will make statements like, well, you know, there's not a lot of research on individual contributors. And that's true. There isn't, if we were to pile up the research for individual contributors next to what we have for managers or leaders, you could hardly identify the stack for individual contributors. And partially, our passion around providing this library is to help everybody who's working within the talent management arena, who wants to either appropriately identify, place, focus on particular things that individual contributors will have the chance to do that. So our focus and passion really is making sure that if you choose, and of course we realize there are lots of folks who have chosen not to do this, but if you choose to say, I really do want to maximize the energy and effort it took to get an individual contributor in the organization, and I want to help them get to where we need them to be in the work that they do for as long as they're with us, then the Kasai library is intended to provide that intentional focus, and an intentional focus unlike any effort that I know of that's been attempted before.
Yeah, I used the term forgotten level before, because oftentimes individual contributors aren't developed with the same mindfulness that we do when we think leadership development. So thank you. I think the burning platform number 2, in addition to individual contributors don't get a lot of development, is that this new generation of workers have some major expectations and frankly, some major power as well. And millennial workers are out in full force, and that generally includes folks who were born between 1981 and let's say 1996. So it could be your 30-something accountant with no direct reports, or it could be somebody entering the workforce at say 24. Basically, millennials, by their size, they're affecting the work world for everybody. And they're definitely different than their parents. They're doing takeout, they're they're online, they are using screens for learning, they are out there talking about their salaries to one another, they're craving feedback, certainly frequent feedback, they're into agriculture, and they really love Netflix. So you know, when you think about all the things that's happening in this generation of workers, I think HBR's got it right. They are telling us, study after study says that they're job hoppers. So we need a specific and better approach to development. And the LinkedIn community continues to talk about the need for advancement and targeted career growth. And if I can add, I have my own 26-year-old son that lives and breathes these tenets every day in what he says he wants in his career. So I think the burning platform is there, and they definitely need some targeted career growth. And when we say targeted career, it's a specific approach to development, and it's focused on the stuff that they do. So as Roger mentioned, this is the roles. So you can see these are the things that individual contributors are responsible for: getting things done, working smoothly with others, tackling difficulties. And the one that Roger mentioned, and is my personal favorite as well, is the bottom one, demonstrating organizational citizenship. And that's the language of the job. And that's the development that gets people to be described within this profile or the brand of being a successful or a high-performing individual contributor. So we've got a question for you, and if you'll open your chat panel, go ahead and rate for us how well organizations are doing investing in the development of individual contributors. Let's use a scale of 1 to 10. So go ahead and just throw that in your chat panel just as a quick check-in. What's your read? Are people making the investment in individual contributors? Yeah, Catherine's saying 3. Kathy says 3. Yeah, I'm not surprised by that. It looks like we are aligned on that. Thank you. Yeah, Maria, you say something important, and that's yes, functional technical skills. Oh, an 8 probably. Let's make sure the accountant can account and the project manager knows how to do project management. But around some of the other skills and practices, especially emotional intelligence, that's an issue. So to help individual contributors grow, get feedback, advance, feel valued, how about we add that one? We have a development approach for them that we call Kasai. And it revolves around the tools that you may have seen in some of our overviews, but this is the Kasai lens, and there are cards that you could use to create a tactile decision-making process and have a conversation about the responsibilities and how individual contributors show up, either should be showing up or current state show up. You'll see a tally sheet and a poster that's on the top right-hand side of your visual here. We have the tools that help you facilitate a resonating discussion around individual contributors. The bottom left visual here is the research-based tools with information that you can use to coach and you can use to develop people. We call them placemats there. And there, of course, is a level-specific, beautiful DIY, which we call Develop It Yourself, for individual contributors that focuses on just the roles and just the practices at the individual contributor level. And I do want to call out that this includes the neuro leadership or the brain science, the brain smarts that get in the way of, for example, why can't someone take constructive feedback? Be coachable is one of our practices, and that is explored in great detail around development tips in the DIY. Of course, there's a 360 assessment, which is a multi-rater tool. So different constituencies from boss to self to peers to even customers, if you will, people who receive the output of your work, and that's delivered by a coach. And of course, there is the hello. We call that hello with an exclamation mark, and that's our selection and interviewing book that connects the language that you're talking about behaviorally to what your recruiters are doing. And that sometimes is a process that happens in a vacuum. So when you're able to help your recruiters know what you're looking for and connect that back to the language and the science and the development, you get a better selection process. So as Roger started to say, this is quite systemic in the way that those tools are laid out. So those are the tools, but let me tell you about the application. I talked about practitioners at the top of the hour here, and that's what can you do with them? Well, you could facilitate an organizational discussion to get that conversation started on individual contributor responsibilities within the context of your organization, because everybody has a different view of whether or not offering input is more of a priority than getting things done. So every organization has a different context that they would view those responsibilities. And in having that discussion, getting the conversation is a great way to get started with these tools. And you could do that with cards. Our tools support coaches who use them for individual development. So you could hone in on the things that really matter at this level, and you could develop somebody individually using our cards and placemats and create a navigational plan for them using those tools. You could move to the multi-rater development. And again, I want to call out and say that we've priced those for accessibility, and you'll find that we don't apologize for that. We want to make them price something so that people can have access to them. And so our multi-rater approach is one that you're going to find is accessible and creates really rich discussions. And in my experience, I think 360 helps people navigate their career. And in my decades of doing 360, the average age of a person, a learner receiving 360 feedback was in their 40s from a normative standpoint. So what would it mean for us if we got people earlier in their career the news they can use with a 360? And then another application listed here on this slide is that you could connect your structured behavior-based interviewing and selection process to get at the right things so that your recruiters are helping you select differentiated talent at the individual contributor level. So there's the DIY, and as we mentioned, that's got beautiful development tips, but I'd like to spend a little bit of time. I know this looks like an eye chart here, but there are placemats that we use. So if you were thinking about how would you use the research-based science behind the library itself for Kasai, as Roger mentioned, all of our practices are organized by domains. So on the top left, we call it side A, is the library structure, and the managing self, doing the work, relating to others, and building a career are the way that we organize our practices into resonating things that break the library into appropriate and important domains that could require some coverage. The second thing on the left-hand side is what we call our developmental difficulty. And we know that not all practices are created equal. And we know that if emotions or a belief system is at play, that might make managing conflict something really hard for an individual contributor to develop. It's not going to just be put it on your development plan and go. We're going to have to break through some of the mud around getting good at that, because it is one of the hardest practices to develop. You'll notice the middle pictures here. Those are our role and domain coding tools for coaches, and that really helps you know where the practices underpin the roles. So for example, the idea that there are certain practices that make you be seen better at, say, getting things done or being a good citizen at the individual contributor level. The pictures and tools that you see on the right-hand side here are the differentiation of what certain assignments teach. You know, there are all the practices coded to specific called out assignments, because we know, you never learn to ride a bike in a seminar, and you would never learn about dealing with uncertainty or ambiguity in a classroom either. And so the lessons of experience within an assignment is teaching, and we have a Kasai library that is connected to all of those assignments that help coaches create resonating development plans. As I mentioned to you, 360 is an important one, and I think imagine the impact if an individual contributor had a navigational compass for their career growth earlier than later in their career, as tends to be the norm. And this is a picture of our hello, and it has the behavior-based structured interview questions and probes and things to look for that can really revitalize your recruiting efforts at this level. So those are the tools. Let me take you through an example, because I think that's when it comes to light. And let's look at an example, and one of our favorite practices, well, Roger, I don't know if I'm speaking for you, but one of my favorite ones is practice 15 in Kasai, and that's being coachable and managing feedback. And that's a practice within the library. And we know that a coach would have to be able to define it. So of course our tools define the differentiation of that. Observable behaviors. So it's acting as coachable, asking for feedback, even when none is given. It's asking questions for clarification. It's remaining calm and maybe even appreciative when you get some feedback, good, bad, and ugly. Separating the relevant from the trivial, being able to act on the feedback, and my personal favorite, confirming the effort to the person who gave the feedback that, hey, I'm actively working on that. It's a conscious, mindful confirmation back to the provider. So our tools give you those words, those resonating, rich, thick language around being coachable, rather than, hey, Joe, just be more coachable. This gives you the observable behaviors to talk about. If you were coaching, you would also know that being coachable is harder to develop because it involves relating to others and the 6 developmental difficulty elements that we've coded through our rubric about what's easier or harder to develop. And then as a coach, you might know, is being coachable and managing feedback a powerful practice? And the answer is, heck yeah, it is. It is a really strong relationship between the practice and the doing of those behaviors across the majority of the individual contributor role responsibilities, which puts it in what we would call the top 10 of practices that underpin all of our roles, making it a very powerful practice at this level. So if you're going to work on something, this might hit the top of the hit parade. And then, as I mentioned, there's some brain smarts things in the development books, and the brain really gets in the way on this one. And the brain is trying to protect the box that it comes in, and it's keeping you safe from threat, pain, or harm, or negative feedback. So we have to get above what our first you or first brain response might be and get past that and say, I can receive the information. And we also know that the best assignment to develop being coachable comes within the external representative. If I can send you to represent our organization at a, I don't know, an accounting conference, or maybe it's a user group where you're subject matter expertise for Maria, those technical functional skills, that is a great way to develop being coachable, because I'd help you do that. So that's just how it works in coaching. All of those placemats I showed you give you this rich information to be able to be coaching more succinctly. Now, if you flip the scale here and think, now, let's think about using this same practice within Kasai from an interviewing standpoint. There are so many people who interview without knowing what to look for. And so we have 45, we call them micro points and learnings, and things that you would read ahead of time as an interviewer. We've even color coded them in red in Hello so that you can have them in the forefront of your brain of, what does a good answer look like? Or what does it look like when someone does this well? There's also, I think, a really rich section of the brain insights, the brain intelligent insights to know when you're interviewing around the behavioral practice. So being coachable has its own list of brain intelligent insights. And in this case, I think there's 34 in being coachable. And then for this practice, there are 8 behavior-based interview questions that you could pick from with specific probes. And those probes get at things like, what did you do? What were you thinking? What were the outcomes? What did you learn? How are you different because? And I just picked out one question here to give you an example of the Kasai approach around being coachable and managing feedback. And you can see on the screen here what those probes look like as well. What I like most, as especially having been a recruiter, is the positive and negative evidence and outcome grid. And you'll find in Hello, there are outcomes, positive and negative, about what someone might say in real time, right there in the interview, to show you that the skill is present or even absent. And it helps with the evaluation on a 10-point scale, where you can get to a much more objective, intangible kind of rating about a candidate, as opposed to, yeah, I think she's good. So I think using Kasai and hello can really enhance your interviewing know-how and connect it to coaching and connect it systemically. So that's the application I wanted to show you. So, whew. Roger, I'll let you weigh in here, but I'd also love for you to move to the Q&A because, you know, the systemic implications lead us to a bunch of different questions that you have been thinking about for a long time. So is this their time for them to be able to bend your ear? We're not hearing you, Roger. Let's see.
By all means, bend.
There you go. All right. All right. Let's see.
While we're waiting on a couple of folks to
Yeah, there's a question
put
here. Oh, go ahead.
in their question,
Mm-hmm.
I wanted to just simply share that one of our clients who, in fact, is rolling out Kasai to 135,000 individual contributors,
Wow.
is finding that there's a great deal of excitement over the ability to have a common language,
Mm-hmm.
a language about the kinds of things that they need to get feedback on, the language about very specific things they can do to become a better citizen of this particular enterprise, the kinds of things they can do to provide the support they need to provide. Just as the head of talent management said, just the capacity to have a language that's specific, both that supervisors and managers can give to the individual contributors, as well as the individual
Yes.
contributors, feeling as though they haven't been just simply thrown in the deep end without a preserver. They feel very much that they now have something that they can rely on. So
Mm-hmm.
you said there was a question already?
Yeah, and I think it came maybe during the presentation, and it's about curious about this work in considering or incorporating an emerging understanding about the social dimensions of learning. How does that question strike you? Curious to know, curious how this work consider incorporating emerging understanding about the social dimensions of learning. Kate, do you want to open up your mic and talk to us? Would that be more expedient? I think it's a good question. Maybe I can do it. There we go.
Hello.
Hi, it says Kate.
Hi. Yeah, this is Mark. I'm using my wife's computer today. Sorry about that.
Cool, got it.
Yeah, I'm curious about kind of thinking about how do you encourage kind of interaction in the learning process using this this model, and how do you support, you know, kind of social learning, team learning along those lines?
Mm-hmm.
I am not trying to sound like I have just fallen off the truck. Let me see if I can understand the question in a couple of levels. One of the things that we know is true is that the e-learning modality that varies by enterprise is pretty huge, and the most effective e-learning programs have social element activities of some form or another amongst the participants, even if it's simply that they agree to be accountability partners and drop each other an email occasionally to find out how things are going on a particular thing that they wanted to work on. So there's that end of social from their experience to what we have found, and this seems to be cross-generational, when we put a deck of cards in front of a small group of people and we say something like this: we want you to sort these practices or roles. Let's say it's just the roles. Given what you know about the job you do, rank order. What's the number one most important role? What's the second, third, all the way down to the 10th? And let's have a conversation about why we think a particular role is number one, why a particular role in this particular enterprise is number 10. And should it be that we keep that foremost in our conversation with one another about how we work together? And what does that look like? So getting them to create the, what I would call bridge of meaning into their particular experience is a very powerful social related conversation. Now, I happen to think getting people in small groups to talk about work-related activities that has focus to it produces all kinds of good things for those folks, both thinking about their work. More often than not, young individual contributors haven't really been in a situation where they've been encouraged to structure their thinking about their work around particular roles, and that is a huge boost, getting them to do that. So I happen to think the language invites the conversation, even if that conversation is a digital one. What does it really mean if we were to say, let's just say we were to say that our number one role in our particular small part of the company was in fact communicating results in a timely manner. Well, okay, so we all put our hands up and said that's the number one role. What does that look like day to day? And what does that look like between you and me? If I've got to get you information or you get me information for me to be able to provide the information up, how are we going to make that happen? And the more of those kinds of conversations we get to have, the stronger the network, the stronger the understanding, the benefit that comes exponentially by being able to say, yes, we agree, this is where we need to be, this needs to be our number one focus. So what I think we all know is true is that when individual contributors start a job, the energy they have is around their expertise, and that's very appropriate. The energy they have is, we've hired you because you are outstanding at X, or we hired you because there's evidence that you have the capability of learning a whole variety of things here that we need you to do. We need you to put your strength behind, your thinking strength behind challenge X, Y, or Z. And what's next?
Yeah.
So the nice thing about Kasai is it says, yes, as you are polishing that talent or that skill or that know-how to work effectively here are some of the other elements of the way to work here in an effective way. And I happen to think getting people into that kind of social conversation and trying to do it in here's another example when I think about social. There's a manager who takes a card deck and chooses a card for discussion at the weekly meetings. So what she's done is she's decided that the library provides a basis just to have a conversation about a particular practice. What are we doing that shows we are living this in the most effective way in the work that we're doing together? And that boosts a kind of common understanding and social networking understanding. There's another whose digital platform allows very intentionally to take a look at the definition and the behaviors related to a practice and then engage in comments on what would this mean if we did this, and shared this collection of observations with one another in our chat space like we're doing here, since it's almost an entirely all of the teams are remote teams in this particular enterprise. So,
Let me piggyback on that, Roger. Another good example, I think, is I'm coaching a individual who works in artificial intelligence, and he's a project manager, and he's never had 360 before. And we're doing Kasai, and we've started to have some conversations around Kasai. And it's interesting. He's very interested in how he can show up, what can he practice immediately at work. He's really interested in this assignment. So what should he be thinking about as he navigates his career? And he's also looking at learning online. So the idea of anything from, say, a TED Talk to how does that fit in with the description of how he shows up has become very important to him. But what resonated with me is he's never been invested in before, and the appreciation and the attention on what he's doing has been very appreciated. So, all right.
Yeah, thanks.
So you're welcome.
That's helpful. I'm just kind of thinking about, to both your point, like how do you leverage that sort of natural peer pressure to create that pull for wanting to have those more robust conversations around this kind of framework, because it's obviously great framework, very well researched and really impressive. And I just think about how to create that pull to draw it into the organization, leveraging those social dimensions. So conversation guides or facilitation, like how to do those kinds of things. I'm curious about those. So that's great. Thank you for.
Very good.
Well, and we can be a little reliant on what social psychology has told us, and that is that in any group, all you need is 3 people. If 3 people will start talking about, let's say, being a good citizen here, or if 3 people will talk about, well, gosh, how can I improve my communication? And I want to do that, though you may have 20. Well, what social psychology has shown us almost without exception is that in any contained group of people, if you can get at least 3 people talking about an idea or an observation, it won't be long before everybody wants to talk about it.
That's awesome.
So using whatever mechanism we can within our particular group, sometimes we know that we have to plant a couple of seeds, and we have to be patient enough to nurture those, to facilitate those. If you haven't read Kagan's Everybody Culture, his recent piece, I say recent, last year, in which he brilliantly talks about where people's headspace gets taken up in everyday work life. And what I think he's telling us is we can be intentional about spreading the seeds about a meaningful work, which this generation especially says it wants to participate in, and that we have to be the engineers of that conversation. And I think we do it through all the different ways that we can, but we know we have to get that conversation going, whether it is through a digital mechanism or some intentional meeting process or whatever other kinds of ways that we do it. But, we're thinking of ourselves these days as opportunity engineers. How do we create opportunities to maximize the moment, to plant a seed or plant an idea or plant an element of conversation in an intentional way that is transformative? One other I know I'm going to run out of time. I have, LM, but I have to say this. The last couple of years, the empirical evidence that intentionality in conversation matters is pretty staggering. And it's gotten me quite excited about how we can help people in the roles that all of you are in become more intentional about creating those opportunities to nudge, in this case, individual contributors in the direction we want them to go.
Cool. Thank you. That's a
Roger,
perfect.
Roger, could you cite just a couple of sources? I'd love to read more about intentionality in conversation.
You know what?
Mhm.
I'll have him write those up and we'll put them in your follow-up email. How's that?
Oh, great. Lovely.
Okay.
Yeah,
Thank you.
thanks.
Good. Okay. Well, we are at time and we definitely have hope we've piqued your interest. And if you haven't yet, there is a 50-page complimentary sample IP that you can get if you go to our site, and you can just download that. And in the individual contributor section, you're going to see being coachable highlighted. And that is a great way to get started thinking about certainly this vital audience. And you can always see what we're up to at Team Intelligent on our website. And if you don't mind, Roger and I would love for you to connect with us on LinkedIn. And certainly we have a business page on LinkedIn for Team Intelligent, so that way you can stay plugged into everything that we're up to, and even our events page or certifications as they come up. So please do follow us both on LinkedIn, Facebook, and on Twitter. So with that, I want to thank you very much for your time and your attention, especially your interest on this vital group, the individual contributor. And if we get it right, I think they won't be forgotten anymore. So with that, let me say thanks for listening and make it a great day, everybody.